What does a rogue look like? A thief, a reprobate, a scoundrel. Can you really spot them in the crowd? This is a knight. That's his squire, and this is their liege. The knight fights for his lord. He fights with honor, with sheer violence. And the liege would levy a tax on the people who worked on his lands for the protection his knights offered them from brigands, raiders, and other invaders. This is the story of a group of marginalized young men who were left behind by the ever-progressing world, who clung on to the feudalism of old to assume a sense of identity and to give their aimless lives a purpose. Inevitably, they would inflict pain and suffering on innocent men, exploit children, and, with violence and contempt, abuse women. At the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, the world started to change rapidly. Feudalism had long been abandoned. Thanks to the advent of medicine and increasing life expectancy, the population was now snowballing. But almost any land that could be farmed had already been turned into one and fenced off. So for more work opportunities, people turned towards industrializing cities. One such city, famous as the City of 1,000 Trades, was positioned right in the middle of England. Many young men found work in Birmingham's iron factories and workshops. The Industrial Revolution not only made production of goods more efficient, but also simplified and reduced the skill and craftsmanship required for the production of many of these goods. It was simply a matter of economics that the price of labor, now all too abundant, would be negligible. Even though wages would increase yearly, so did the cost of living. Those who couldn't afford a roof over their head paid for a chance to sleep in coffin-like boxes, but there were also cheaper establishments available. In one such establishment, the guests would sleep in a sitting position on a row of benches while supported with a line of rope. There were also tales and rumors about factories in which the workers, who were tightly packed together, would sleep on a line of rope in a standing position. In the morning, when it was time to go back to work, the foreman would simply untie the rope. However, I haven't found any primary sources backing this particular kind of horrid sleeping arrangement. And so this was the lot of many young working men in life. Their wages were only enough to feed them, bed them in squalor, and quench their thirst. With little to no belongings but the clothes on their back, the only thing they could feel ownership over was the streets they inhabited. With nothing to lose but this sense of ownership over the street, the repercussions of crime seemed frivolous. Those that the ever-progressing world had left behind would now look back to the past for their salvation, at a time where might makes right. So it was that in the 1860s, territorial gangs would emerge, most of which were named after the street that they came from. But one of these gangs would be named after the fashionable hats that their members wore, rather than any particular street. Their name was the Peaky Blinders. The gang comprised of both petty criminals and working men who found solace in fighting and violence. As a gang, they were able to exert their control over the city. The young recruits, many of whom were barely in their teens, would indulge in petty crimes such as pickpocketing on the streets, and the older members would often commit needless acts of violence against innocent people just to assert their dominance. With belt buckles, metal-tipped boots, fire irons, knives, and handkerchiefs filled with sharp stones, they were ready to spill blood to protect the honor and reputation of the gang. And the leaders of the gang would collect the money that the bookmakers at the horse racing tracks owed the gang for the protection they offered against other gangs. With harsher policing, state schooling, and the creation of sports clubs for young men, by the early 20th century, slugger gangs like the Peaky Blinders disappeared entirely. But the TV show Peaky Blinders looks at an alternative history where three working-class brothers who were part of the gang in their youth have just come back from the war. A war the likes of which was never seen before in human history. A war that had no rhyme or reason.
with Tommy Shelby, I think the effect of the First World War can't be understated, really. I think he's come back from there with a massive disdain for authority. I think he's come back godless. He's seen the fragility of life and how like it disappears.
In the modern era, people started to look for ways to reimagine their society. Disillusioned by the horrors of war, Thomas Shelby rejects them all. Instead, when he looks to the past, the violent brutality of feudalism doesn't seem to bother him anymore. His only ambition in life becomes that of preserving his family and propagating their name, so that he would be in a position where no one again could send him or anyone in his family to another pointless war. This ambition sets him on a path where he has to be vicious and violent, but also cunning and diplomatic, making alliances with his enemies through marriage. Thomas Shelby is perhaps one of the most magnetic characters shown in television. He's cold, detached, and violent, yet most viewers like him regardless. I think that's because most people can, in a sense, empathize with his condition, his lost innocence, and his struggle from rags to riches in a world that discarded him and other young working-class men like him. In an attempt to mythologize the characters in Peaky Blinders, everything on the show is bigger in scale than it was in reality. Their knives have been turned into guns, and their adversaries became far more significant. We are meant to see these characters as they would see themselves, warriors who, however brutal or perverse, still have their own code of honor. By glamorizing Thomas Shelby, his ambitions, and the world he was a part of, the TV show dangerously blurs the line between the heroes and villains. It opens the door for empathy for people who think that their vitriol to others and contempt of the world is justified. These are the real faces of people who, for one reason or another, made choices in life that harmed others. What do you see in these faces? Do you see a rogue, a reprobate, a scoundrel? Do you see someone desperate, or do you see a monster? If you look really hard, can you see a part of yourself?